up, everybody? Welcome back to Krebsbach Racing. Today is all about engine and drivetrain. We'll go through the diffs, rear diff, transfer case, that type of stuff, and then we'll get into the engine bay. I ran about 5 different turbos on this car, so you get to see all the dynagraphs from those and see which one kind of worked best for me on track with the gearing that we have selected. So let's get into it. Starting at the back of the car, we have the rear diff. This is a Evo 9 diff. We have poly bushings in the mounts here, and we also have a Torque Solutions mustache bar delete kit. Just mounts on the back of the diff. Then you need to drill a hole and install a bolt that kind of holds the back of the diff. Delete's about 25 pounds, I believe. The stock mustache bar is all steel and just huge. This is a Team Rip Engineering rebuilt diff. They have their own 12-plate stack that they use for this. They also have a hardened side plate. There's a bunch of different details that they go into. They shot peen, they gear detail, they do all kinds of stuff. Glass bead paint. They even put a little sight glass in the back of the diff right here so you can see how much fluid you have in it. Super detailed, they do great work. I wouldn't hesitate to send anything drivetrain related from an Evo 9 to their shop. As far as axles go, we're using stock Evo 9 axles. I've never had an issue with those, but I also don't launch the car very much. Using the stock drive shaft, I've never had any issues with that as well. I like to have just a little bit of play and stuff, especially in the drive line. So the drive shaft is kind of a spot where it's just got a little bit of play in it. Gives the gears and stuff like that a little bit of a break from harsh engagements. Moving up to the front, we have the transfer case. This is also built by Team Rip Engineering. It has an ATS 1.5 way diff inside of it. They also have a nice little cooler that Team Rip makes. Super happy with this. A lot of people have broken these diffs, the ATS 1.5 way, and they have a new version out. I haven't gotten one yet. But I do have a new Cusco diff inside this new one. Team Rip built this for me as well. It's a Cusco one-way diff, so we'll be installing that. The transmission was also rebuilt by Team Rip Engineering. As far as parts inside, everything's pretty much stock except for a straight cut fourth gear. Fourth gear, a lot of people tend to break those with all the torque kind of coming out of corners, all that torque loading up and shears the teeth off the fourth gear. So we run a straight cut 1.0 fourth gear, so it's a little longer. You can run it to about 130 miles an hour, 140 depending on your RPMs. Also has a nice little cooling plate on the bottom. And again, shot peened, super nice and clean. For a clutch, we're running the Exedi Twin Disc HD, the heavy duty clutch. Super easy to drive, nice pedal feel. You can slip it a little bit if you're trying to launch for autocross and stuff like that. Overall, been super happy. I've been running this clutch for 8 years, I believe. We went through a few of them. You got to make sure you don't slip it too much or you can overheat and warp the discs. But other than that, the car has been super happy with the clutch. Underneath all these hoses is a daily dry sump. Evos are prone to long right-hand corners and losing oil pressure, so I went this way as kind of a safety precaution. It's been great so far. I haven't had any issues. Runs about 100 psi oil and doesn't drop at all when we're going through long corners, especially if you're running a better tire like a bigger AO52 or a Hoosier. You're going to need something like this. It's another picture of the daily dry sump. The feed line comes out the top of the pump. We have it going to the oil filter housing right here, and then right back down on the side and goes back to the back side of the engine. We have a custom lower intercooler pipe. It's just a boot on one end, goes over to the intercooler, and we have vibrant clamps on pretty much every part of the exhaust. This is just easier, going from 2 to 2.5 inch, just to use a rubber boot, and we don't have any problems with it blowing off or anything like that. We actually cut and welded the turbo outlet on the stock outlet and moved it over, so you got a little space now between the exhaust and the boot. Some people it'll be too close to here and it will melt the boot. You end up ripping a hole in that, so this is kind of a little safety precaution as well. When it comes to bolt-ons, we did a Skunk 2 intake manifold to the Bosch drive-by-wire throttle body, a Torx adapter, which is kind of like a vibrant clamp as well. Custom intercooler piping to a teal blow-off valve right here, which leads to a 3.5 inch ETS intercooler. We have just a custom intake here with a 3-inch K&N filter and a 45-degree boot. We're running Torque Solutions solid mounts. I did the softest poly I can do. I believe it's 60A, just to keep a little bit of movement. Like I said before, I don't want stuff to be completely solid. You end up breaking stuff that way, so just a little bit of give. When it comes to the engine, this is a 4G63 stock block and stock head. We run a 94mm billet crank, Manley I-beam turbo tough rods with 625 hardware, CP pistons, 10:1 compression ratio. It's bored out to 85.5. Stock is 85, so we bore them out just to make sure that they're perfect. Then we have upgraded pins as well. In the head, we have GSC S2 cams with Kigley Beehive valve springs. We also have a Kigley HLA that cuts down on the oil that cools up in the head. For cooling, we have a Coilrad radiator along with a MA Performance 14-inch fan kit. Let's get into the 5 different turbos that I've ran. Now you can see the picture shows the 3 different Garretts that I've ran, the G25 550 and 660, and then the G30 770. All these turbos were ran on E85. Some were ran on a 2-liter, some were ran on a 2.2 liter, and I'll kind of point those out as we go. We'll start off with the stock turbo. This is the stock Evo 9 turbo, and as you can see, you can make a ton of horsepower just with this turbo. Right around 390 torque, 380 horsepower. You do have to taper down boost quite a bit because the turbo can't hold it. All the way out to redline, we're all the way down to probably 18, 16 PSI when we're all the way out to 8,000 RPM. But super fun, can't complain about this. I was super happy after I got this tune done. Compared to stock, you gain about 80 to 100 horsepower, I believe. Ronnie does a great job, and he can tune this in, I don't know, 3-4 runs even. Ronnie's done a ton of stock turbo Evos, so he's very experienced in knowing how much boost the stock turbo can take. I ran this turbo for about 2 years with 0 issues, so as you can see, the tune is super safe. Didn't have any issues, which was great. Got to learn a lot about the car and focus on my driving. This here is the stock turbo dotted line versus the FP green old school turbo. We're running about 450 with the FP green. Boost is a little bit later. We're at 4,300 RPM, fully spooled. Stock turbo is back at about 3,900. So lose just a little bit, but really not much power in the lower end. Still spools really quick. This was my King of the Mountain 2022 setup. As you know, it worked out pretty well. Having a little MyVac issue here. Couldn't get it to turn over a little bit earlier, but worked really well. If you're looking for a turbo upgrade, an FP Green is the perfect solution, I think. Around 450, a ton of power, a lot of usable power underneath the power curve. This is also a journal bearing turbo, so you might pick up just a little bit of spool if you do a ball bearing. I use this for autocross. I wouldn't necessarily use the journal bearing on a time attack or a road course car. Definitely go with the ball bearing there. But it's super simple to install as it's a direct bolt-on over the stock turbo, so you don't have to mess with any exhaust manifolds or lines or anything like that. This is the G25 550 from Garrett on a 2-liter. We have 2 different tunes here. One's kind of a low boost and high boost. We started off with around 27 PSI. Tapered that down a little bit, making about 440 horsepower. I ran that for a while and didn't have any issues. And then we turned up the turbo later on in the year. I think this was 2018. And ran about 470 horsepower. I would say this is too much. We didn't have a turbo speed sensor at the time, and I would guess we were well into the 200,000 RPM on our turbo. And we did have some turbo failures, so the safe spot for the 550 would probably be around the 440 to 450 horsepower range on the Evo platform. If you look at the spool, we're fully spooled by around 4,300, which is about the same as the FP Green. I don't have a graph of them laid over each other, but as far as cost goes, the FP Green would probably be my choice over the G25 550. They make about the same horsepower. It's just a lot easier install on them. Now we get to my favorite turbo. This is the G25 660 from Garrett. We made an absolute shit ton of power. All of the spool, by far my favorite. I used this for a couple years. This is on a brand new 2.2 liter motor built by RS Motors. They also went through the head, so all the valves were sealing correctly. brand new turbo as well. So we never really made more power than this with the G25 660. After about a year, we were down in the 530s or something like that. We also lowered boost a little bit. Again, we were pushing the turbo pretty hard. I'm sure we were well over 200,000 RPM on the turbo. We made 552 horsepower, around 480, 490 torque. I mean, the thing was just a monster. Coming out of corners in third gear, you could pull 40, 45 miles an hour. It would still spool and just go out of the corner. It was kind of insane. Especially with the stock gearing, this is kind of where you want to be. I found when I moved up to the G30 770, I had a little bit too much lag coming out of corners. It was just a hair too big. I needed to either size my tires down or size my gearing down a little bit in order to be able to still pull third. I'd have to shift down to second maybe, which is kind of an in-between gear coming out of corners. It's only maybe 60 miles an hour in second gear, so you'd have to shift coming out of the corner actually before you even hit the corner exit. So by far my favorite turbo. If you're going to go for the ultimate setup, I think for kind of a street class time attack car, this is what I would go with. Anything more and you'd be stepping into like track mod or unlimited type territory. Last but not least, we have the G30 770 versus the max power of the G25 660. As you can see, their spool is quite a bit later. We're fully spooled by around 47, 4800, where the G25 is back here in the 4400, 4500 range. Lost quite a bit of spool in the lower end, so like I said before, those 40 to 50 mile an hour corners in third gear, you really had to be, I mean, you were on throttle way before apex, just trying to get the car to go. It took a long time for the turbo to spool. It's also a lot slower on transient response, so even if you were up in the RPMs, it took just that split second matters in kind of every corner. I looked in data at Gingerman. Gingerman was the only time I ran this turbo, and just the little bit you had to wait coming out of corners was just enough to where this extra power up here, like I said, we were probably down 30 horsepower before because we were in the 530 range on the 660, but even the extra power wasn't enough to catch back up going down the straights. Just that extra few tenths that you'd get from the 660 coming out of the corner was enough to stay ahead kind of the whole way, all the way down, even the longer straight like the back straight of Gingerman. So making more power but not really gaining any time on track. We also finally had a turbo speed sensor so we could monitor the RPMs on the turbo. The 770 we could take to about 160,000 RPM, 165. It's a little bit bigger turbo, so not as much RPM. But as you can see, we really didn't run much more boost than the 660 was at max. We were running about 32, tapered down to 30, 29, which is why we kind of don't have that huge hump kind of in the middle of power right here. Just trying to be a little bit safer with the turbos. I was kind of sick of blowing up turbos. I'll show you guys some carnage in a little bit. A little bit more power, but really not much time gained on the track. Here's some turbo carnage for you guys. This is a 660. Most of the time it was just due to overspinning the turbo, I believe. Bending the shaft, and the shaft would just snap. Here's another one that kind of bent, still all together, but obviously leaking oil. This is a bent shaft on a 550 right before World Autocross in Texas. We had to swap for a G660 then. And this was a 550, I believe, at Autobahn the first time I had this car out with a new turbo on it on the back straight. Just blowing smoke everywhere, but obviously turn the turbos down just a little bit and you'll be just fine.